Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. Happy Saturday.
Morning.
Hi, guys. How's it going?
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Look at us being so studious on a Saturday morning in November. Oh, my goodness.
I guess you could say that's a benefit of COVID. What else are we going to be doing? Except maybe outside
Honestly.
for a walk.
Honestly. Totally. A silver lining of COVID is that we all have a little bit more time on our hands, possibly.
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to get started here just a minute, but I hope everybody is settling in, having a great Saturday. Grab a coffee, grab a water, whatever you need. And we have about a minute or so to go. It's so great to see everybody online this morning. It's always so much fun when we have a good amount of people. So thank you guys so much for being here. All right, so welcome to the Finishing Strong Graduate Student Writing Clinic. Our clinic this morning is from 10 until 12. And so, of course, this is for you. So if you feel like you need to pop in and out, please do so. I do think that this will be taking about the full 2 hours. We actually usually do our clinic for 3. So we've had to do a few adjustments. Just nobody wants to sit on Zoom for 3 hours on a Saturday. So we've really tried to distill it for everybody. So thank you so much for being here. My name is Emily, and I will do a little bit of an introduction on the next slide. So our agenda for this writing clinic, we're going to start out the clinic by doing a little bit of a check-in just to see where you guys are in the writing process, what issues you might be having, because of course I want this to be geared towards you all. So I want to make sure that what I'm talking about is relevant for you and your writing. I do have 2.5 sections that I do plan to go through. But if there's something that is, all of you want to focus on instead, I'm totally open to doing that. I do plan on going through at least a little bit for how to make our writing more clear, more concise, how to organize our writing, and then the dreaded APA style. As you guys know, or I hope you know, APA changed from APA 6 to APA 7 this semester. So I know that at least myself, I have definitely been struggling with some of those changes in my own writing. So we're going to talk about some resources. We're not going to do a deep dive into APA today, but I will be providing you with a lot of resources to support you in your writing. Because otherwise it's going to take us 2 hours just to go through APA, and nobody wants that. And then at the end of this, we will have questions, but we're going to go through the timeline in a little bit more detail here in a second, because I will be having, staggered questions throughout this writing clinic. This is me. I tried to make myself like a little avatar, and it doesn't look anything like me. But my name is Emily. I am a writing coach at the Souls Writing Center. But instead of doing one-on-one support, I lead a lot of the workshops. And so I lead workshops on action research, literature reviews, methodologies. And for the past 3 years, I think, I've been co-leading this writing clinic with Dr. Herrera. Dr. Herrera, unfortunately, won't be here today. She is out of commission, so it will just be me, but that's okay. We can do this. And I also teach a course, EDUC 549. I don't know if anybody is in the Masters of Education for TESOL program, but I do teach the practicum course for that program. And I am a PhD student through the new program, the PhD in Education for Social Justice. So I do like to think that I am kind of like a bridge between a student and an instructor, because I do have both of those roles. And so, of course, this is for you. If there's anything that we can cover specifically that applies to, you know, the majority of us, I'm happy to go through that with everyone. So this is basically what we're going. This is how the writing clinic is usually structured. So face to face, it's a little bit different because we can offer one-on-one support. For an online version of this, what we're going to be doing is that we're going to be workshopping as we go. So, what that means is I plan to review a bunch of academic writing suggestions. And these suggestions have come from some of the main issues that the Writing Center coaches have seen. And this is across the board, across disciplines, across languages, experiences, all that kind of good stuff. So we've kind of distilled like the the most comments that we give for student writing into this workshop. As I'm going through these suggestions, it is up to you to have a document or a few documents up, and then as we're reviewing, for you to go through your document. At the end of each section, I will give us about 15 minutes for questions and also for you to review your document at that time. Like, so for example, when I go through word choice, have your lit review up or have your essay paper up and start going through that word choice as well. So this is going to be kind of like a synchronous workshop that we're doing, which has actually worked out really well in the spring. Um, as I said, at the end of each question, we'll have time for both general and specific questions. So that can be a time where you guys ask questions about just general information that I just went through, but also you could ask specific questions about your writing. And so we will definitely have time to do that. So this is our tentative timeline. I totally am up to being super flexible and getting rid of this timeline to make sure that your needs are getting covered. I always just try to come into any sort of workshop with a tentative outline, so we have a little bit of structure though. So you can see that we're going to, do some writing for clarity. Then we'll have some questions and review time. We're going to go through the organization and then also have some questions and review time, and then go through some APA sources and then have some general questions. And so this is how I've structured this. And so this has worked well in the past, but if we get to the middle and we want to go a different direction, I'm open to that as well. So, what I always like to do in the beginning of our workshops is just to check in with you and ground what we're talking about in your needs. So, in our Zoom chat button, if you could please just share what you're struggling with the most in your writing. And that will really help us really help me be able to ground what I'm saying in your own experiences. Oops. There we go. So yeah, so in the chat, could you just share what you're struggling with the most or any issues you're having, any just general questions you might have. So let's take about 5 minutes to do that, about 3 minutes to do that. Ooh, nice. The transition between undergraduate and graduate writing. Great. Nice. Academic language. Good, good, good. Formalized structure and framework when we're getting started. Nice. Hmm. One of our workshop members said that they're struggling with just kind of the fear of how their writing sounds, and I'm sure that a lot of us can relate to that. Just struggling with our confidence in writing. Yeah, totally. I've been there. Setting up the topics. Interesting. Yeah. Writer's block. Yes. Yes. I think everybody can relate to that. Especially this time of the semester. Better use of graduate language, less words, more depth and clarity. Oh, you've come to the right place. Having patience. Oh, Carrie, thank you for sharing that. Yes, that's so important. Transitions. Oh, we're going to go through them. Yes. Having trouble fluffing up a document. Can briefly and clearly break up a thesis, but it's so hard for me to use more words to make it longer. Okay, interesting. Great. Knowing what the instructor is wanting. Yes, 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 yes. Of course. That's always a guessing game, huh? And that doesn't feel nice. Fear is accurate. Great. Okay, writing in a more academic fashion. Amazing, amazing. Okay, so if you want to continue sharing, I'm a bit wordy at times, APA citations, totally, totally. We'll go through that. Active and passive, definitely. Wonderful. So keep on sharing these suggestions. What I'm hearing a lot of is just kind of this lack of confidence or lack of feeling assured with your own writing at the level that you're at. We are not going to be going through footnotes today, Rosa, but that might be a really great question for a specific writing coach. Yes, that is a super specific question, which I'm glad you're asking. But that might be a better question geared towards your professor or one of the specific writing coaches. Yeah. Yes, confidence, confidence. Okay. So before we get started, let me assure every single one of you here that you are here for a reason, not necessarily in this writing workshop, but you are in school for a reason. You have been accepted into the program for a reason. Your teachers believe in you. I believe in you. I'm sure your classmates believe in you. And so, no matter where your writing is or how confident you are, you 100% belong here. And school is a plethora of things. Writing is part of it, but writing does not define you as a student or as a professional. Okay. So, we are whole without being rock star writers, but I have a sneaking suspicion we're all better writers than we actually think we are. So I'm hearing a lot about this kind of graduate style and type and expectations of writing. And so we are going to talk a lot about specific things that can make our writing sound better. And so, what I mean by better, which is very subjective, is just more graduate level. Okay. And so, um, hopefully at the end of this workshop, we have these tricks so that we can go through our documents and do some edits to make it feel more concise, to make it sound more academic. And so we're going to go through that a lot. So I know that this idea of like standards and figuring out what our professors want from us is really, really scary. And especially if we don't have any models to show us like where our writing should be. I'm definitely grappling with that in the PhD program. I'm constantly feeling like, wow, I'm reading these articles and they're so dense and they're so academic. But that doesn't mean they're necessarily better, right? It just means that it's a kind of a different kind of style. And so we can walk through, just these smaller tricks to kind of, um, I don't know, just kind of whip up our writing a little bit. Okay. And so another suggestion I have that I will go through at the end of this program as well, but use the writing center, use the writing center coaches. And so if you haven't used this, I have the writing center website linked at the end of this PowerPoint, but you can send in 3 documents per semester. A writing coach is assigned your document, they review it, they send you feedback back, and then you jump on Zoom to have about a 45-minute phone call with them. And so if you are seeking that one-on-one support, I highly suggest the one-on-one support from the writing coaches. And especially if you're just worried, like, hey, does this sound right? Like, does this sound at the speed that I should be sounding at, because that's tricky, especially, if it's your first semester. Okay, so thank you so much for sharing all of this, you guys. Thank you for being vulnerable with all of us. I'm seeing so many similarities, and I hope that you are feeling not so alone. So we are going to go through how to write for clarity. And this is going to include This is going to include 8 different things. But basically, we want to move away from our writing being very, very wordy and very, actually, I'm going to use, let me see, hold on, let me see who said this. Um, yeah, so Rosa said she wants to expand her document. And so, like I'm going to use the word beef it up, Rosa, like get it like beefy, get it thicker, because actually the word that we use, like the word fluff, is we want to actually stay away from that. And so the difference between like, I'm going to put this in the chat, okay? And this is not an academic term. So beefing up your writing versus fluffy writing. Okay, so beefing up your writing means that it is strong, it is thorough, but fluffy writing means that we include information that doesn't need to be there. And we try to lengthen our writing just by adding certain words or phrases. And so we want to focus on strengthening our writing. And we want to, by doing that, we want to move away from the fluffiness, which is just so funny. Okay. Again, not academic terminology. But we actually want to move away from it being super wordy and we want to move into it being concise. And so you can see with this example, and we will go back to this example, but I know a lot of us can write this for a sentence, right? As reported by Insider Higher Ed, students were told by the university admissions that tuition would be increased by 3%. Whew. Okay, 20 words. We can make that more concise. According to Insider Higher Ed, USD officials announced a 3% tuition increase. Got it. Okay, more specific, more concise, stronger information. So, what steps do we do to make that first sentence look like that second sentence? There are 8 culprits, is what we're going to call them. Okay, 8 issues that we have seen in our students' writing over and over and over again. So, I'm going to list them and then I'm going to go into each of them specifically. So the first one is unnecessary phrases. Okay, I think somebody verbatim stated that in the chat. Tiny words, big problems. So if you have so many prepositions. Why is this being funny? Okay, let me go. There we go. Okay, so the ugly words, so ly words, so those are adverbs. Words that end in ing or tion, we're going to stay away from. Passive voice, I know at least a few of you mentioned that in the chat. The use of helping verbs in academic writing, we don't want to use those. Vague pronouns, which I definitely use and I need to stop using them. And then imprecise word choice. So these are 8 very specific parts of student writing that the writing center has seen over and over and over that we want to bring to your attention. So we're going to start with unnecessary phrases, and this might be the simplest one. Okay. So we want to be direct in our writing. We want to be emphatic in our writing. So what that means is we want to be strong. And to do that, we need to get rid of any I statements like I believe, in my opinion, I think, I feel. And this might, for some of you, you might say, oh, well, obviously that's such an obvious thing, but we see this over and over and over at the writing center. Okay. So for my friends who just joined us, if you could pull up one of your documents as we're going through the workshop, because we're going to be workshopping as we go, that can be really useful. So when you're looking at your writing, do that control search or control find and type in I and see what is happening. Like, I believe, in my opinion, I think, I feel. All of these need to be deleted. Okay. There's not a single situation where we're going to be using this in our writing. Okay. And what I tell my students is I can look to the top of your paper and see your last name. So why do you need to say, I believe, I think, I feel? It's redundant. But more than that, when you say I believe, you're saying my own personal belief, the belief of one person. And that's not very strong. Okay. That's the reason why we don't really use quotes in academic writing as much as we do synthesis and paraphrasing. Because if you just state an opinion, it's only yours. So it's only as strong as you are. But if you just use a statement, it sounds significantly stronger because it's not just attributed to one person. So let's take a look. So the difference here is I think college has in some ways become unappealing to people because they feel forced to major in something they're not interested in just to make the big bucks. Okay. Yeah, so there's lots of issues wrong with this sentence, right? But the immediate one is that we need to get I think that out of the sentence. Okay, that's what we're focusing on here. So you want to start with the subject, right? College has, in some ways, become unappealing to people because they feel forced to major in something not interested in just to make the big bucks. Okay, so for this exact sentence, we need to remove I think that, I believe that, I feel that. Okay, we use this often in our regular speech, but that's something that we want to move away from. Okay, so as you're going through your document, definitely just search and find I think, I believe, I feel, da 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 da. Okay, so get rid of those. Our second part is tiny words, big problem. And what we mean by this is prepositions. Okay. So prepositions are one of the most used types of speech in the English language, and it often leads us into prepositional phrases, which is a way to expand our writing that isn't a good way. We want to be really concise and really direct with what we're saying. And oftentimes, prepositions and prepositional phrases actually leads us to be more vague or leads us to be repetitive. Okay. So we want to take a look at our writing and be like, hey, is there a way that we can consolidate this? So we can look at this example. I think that, remember, we're getting rid of this. We're working off of the same example. College in some ways has become unappealing to people because they feel forced to major in something they're not interested in just to make the big bucks. Okay. So we have 6 prepositions here, so many in one sentence. So we can look at the second sentence and see some of these changes. College has, excuse me, become unappealing for some who feel pressured to select a less desirable major in favor of a more lucrative career path. So there's lots of changes happening, and we are able to consolidate what we're saying to a more concise and direct sentence. So we were able to change and reduce this original sentence by 7 words. And also, I will send you this PowerPoint at the end of the workshop. Can you go back to the box with the words? Sure. So we can check out. So if you don't, boop, 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 boop. Yeah. So here we go. So prepositions there's so many prepositions in English. Okay. I teach English and then I also teach English as a second or other language. And at the college I teach at, they still call them ESL classes. So in my ESL classes, my students struggle with prepositions the most. And it's because there are so many and they are used in so many different ways. So these are some examples of prepositions, but it's not all of them. And so what I would do if you're not sure what prepositions are is I would just pull up, go to Google Image, pull up preposition list, check it out, go to your longer sentences and start identifying the prepositions and seeing if there's a way you can consolidate that sentence, if the meaning can be said in a more direct way. Okay. So what I use a lot is just going to Google Image and you can type in preposition list, English preposition list. Okay. And then go to your more, your longer sentences, I guess. I don't know really how else to say that, and see if there's a way to make it more concise. Perfect. And so then you can highlight them and just go through your document and see if wordiness is a problem for you. And I know that a few of you did mention that in the chat. If wordiness is something you're paying attention to, definitely go through and pay attention to your prepositions, because your prepositions can help you find places in your writing that you can consolidate. So similar to prepositions is this focus on adverbs. Now, adverbs is a word that describes other words like verbs and adverbs and adjectives. And so adverbs, we don't really need them in our writing, and that's for a few reasons. The first one is that the use of adverbs is oftentimes unnecessary. So you can say a sentence in a more direct way without having to use the word, without using the adverb. They oftentimes are just kind of there for style or emphasis. And there's different ways to emphasize your point without adding these adverbs, okay? The other reason we don't use these is because of subjectivity. In our academic writing, like a lot of you asked about the difference between undergrad and grad writing, and we just really want to remove our emotions from our writing in graduate writing. We want to be able to write about and prove a point without putting our emotions in our writing. So we're not going to say this was really good or this is very important, because very important is subjective, right? So we need to find a different way to say very important. Instead of saying this was very important information, you could say vital information shows us da 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 da. So think about how you can use if you're using the words like very and really and actually and truly, these are just superfluous, okay? Which means it's unnecessary. So what's a stronger way for you to write what you're talking about? Um, Actually, with my students, there's also, you can go online and say, go to Google and type in different words to use instead of very. And there's a huge list. Okay. So it's just a much better way to bump up our writing and make it more academic. So this is just an example of subjectivity and superfluous words as well. So if you see, we just delete the word actually. So climate change is actually humanity's greatest challenge. Okay, so actually has no purpose here. All right, we're just using it because this is how we speak. So it does not have a purpose. So we can say climate change. Sorry about my dogs. Climate change is humanity's most urgent challenge. And so, sorry, I'm getting a delivery and my dogs just do not like the delivery person. So my apologies. um, so underneath it, instead of saying greatest, we can say most urgent. And what we would do here is we would cite where we got that information, because we don't want to use something like great when that's a very subjective word, where urgent is provable. Okay. Um, and so we want to be able to prove what we're saying. So you would then cite the information that you're finding. So climate change is humanity's most urgent challenge. And then you can go in and pull sources from outside and support what you're saying. But greatest is not really provable. Okay. Okay. So we're about halfway through of our writing for clarity. Oh no, sorry, Danny. I know I have two terriers and they're vocal. So funny. Thanks for being understanding, everyone. So now we're looking for these words that end in, so we've talked about prepositions, we've talked about adverbs. Now we're looking for words that end in ing and tion. And this is kind of hard to explain, but most of these words are unnecessary. And you want to read for suffixes. So you're trying to look at the ends of words and change them. You're also trying to see, because with tion and ing words, they're often included with verbs and prepositions. So it's all kind of connected. So if you look for these and start changing them, then your prepositions will be reduced, your adverbs will be reduced, and your writing in general will be more cleaned up, academically speaking. You also need to check, your verb tenses and your gerunds. These are all just funky ways of making our writing longer without really adding anything to it. And remember, we want to try to consolidate it. We want to try to make it more concise. And so just a super simple thing is just the present continuous can oftentimes be change to the present simple. And so, instead of this continuous form, let's just change it to the simple tense. And we're going to get into I know that in the second bullet point, I mentioned helping verbs, and we're going to get into that just here in a second. But when you're looking for the ION and TION and ING, again, they're often surrounded by these additional excess words. So let's take another example. Okay. So this statement says, in order for frameworks such as culturally relevant pedagogy and culturally competent to work, teachers must have training on how to participate in the implementation of strategies. Okay, that's a mouthful, right? So for students to benefit from culturally relevant pedagogy and culturally competent frameworks, school districts must train teachers to implement the strategies. Okay, so we can see that in the implementation of strategies, change to implement the strategies. To work, teachers must have training. So instead we can say school districts must train. So again, we're just getting rid of these extra words and becoming more concise. So you can, again, do your document search, look for these ing words, look for these tion words, and see how can I change this. Okay, have training can just be must train. In the implementation can just be to implement. So by doing this, we're getting rid of these extra words. We're making our ideas clearer, and the reader can understand our ideas in a more direct way. Okay, perfect. So we're going to keep going unless you guys have questions. And we've had a few questions in the chat, which thank you so much for asking. So again, if you ever have a question while I'm going through it, just plug it into the chat and I can see it. So number 5 is the passive voice, and we want to stay away from the passive voice in our writing. We need our writing to be agent focused, which means we need to figure out who is doing the action. Now, I know that writing in the passive voice oftentimes expands our writing because we need to include a lot more linguistic components, but we want to stay away from that. And again, this goes back to this idea of being direct. So instead of saying the data tool used in this research was drawn from data that was collected from an interview with 5 open-ended questions, we can say researchers, right? The researchers are the agents. The researchers are the ones doing the action. So researchers collected data from interviews consisting of 5 open-ended questions. Oh, I hope you guys can hear this difference. The first sentence is such a mouthful, and you look at this and the reader says, okay, I understand it, but I need to go back and reread it again. The data tool used. Okay, so what was the data tool? In this research was drawn. Okay, who did the drawing? From data. Okay, so data tool and then data was collected from an interview. So there was the interview, the data collection tool. So it's, there's a lot of different kinds of ways to poke holes in this. Instead, the active voice, researchers collected data from interviews consisting of 5 open-ended questions. Boom. This is direct. It is not confusing. The reader is not going to sit here and be like, okay, I need to reverse this because it's written in the passive tense. So make sure we're starting our sentences with an agent, the person or thing doing the action. Okay. So here's another example of the passive voice being used. As the education field becomes more inclusive and takes into account the varying levels and learning styles, new methods of teaching are being experimented with. So if you wrote that sentence, your professor will highlight this and say, who is doing the experiments? What is happening here? Who is doing this? Researchers, students, teachers, stakeholders, what's happening here? So instead, we can say, as the education field becomes more inclusive and educators acknowledge different learning styles, teachers are experimenting with new methods of teaching. Okay, so this is way more direct. we have a lot more specific information that we can understand moving forward. So we have educators put into this second sentence, we have teachers put into the second sentence, and this is a new methods of teaching. So, okay, so we've named the educators, we've named the teachers, and we've named the methods. This is way clearer because if you, although this almost looks like it's a little longer, the second one, what would happen if you wrote this first sentence is then you'll have to go on to explain it. So you'll have this first sentence and you're like, okay, great, I got this. And then you're going to have to go into detail about it. And so actually that first sentence would be expanded into multiple sentences of you trying to explain what you're talking about. So instead, we want to use this second sentence, which is more direct. What you're saying is encompassed into one sentence. And we're getting rid of the passive voice and we are including the active voice. Okay. So what we talked about with our TION and ING words is we want to avoid unnecessary words and phrases that come about when we use those words, right? So remember, TION and ING, they're surrounded by additional words that are usually superfluous. So what we also want to look at is unnecessary infinitive phrases, unnecessary supporting words. So one way we can do this, and I know that what I did is I just sent you in the chat, I said, Google different words to use instead of very. And I use this with my students in community colleges, and I use this with my students, my final semester graduate students. Like, use these charts, because if you look at these charts, they give you beautiful, beautiful examples of much stronger verbs. And I wonder if we can just go ahead and pull that up. Words to use instead of very. Yes, so there's going to be lots of different lists. So what I tend to do, as I said, is go to Google Images, and you can find a ton of different lists here. So this is definitely one of mine. It's one of my favorites. It's going to be hard for us to see since we're on Zoom, but you can see, like, instead of very bad, we say awful. Instead of very smart, we say intelligent. So instead of very careful, we use cautious. And so this is a way to replace the adverb adjective combo with just a very strong adjective. Now, to be clear, remember we said that we want to move away from subjective writing. So we want to be very careful with with which adjectives we use. Okay, so if we are paraphrasing or synthesizing information, if you're talking about hunger, you can use the word starving, because um, that is a more direct adjective than the word awful. Like, if you describe something in your academic writing as awful, you need to be able to make sure that you can support that with your research, and that you're not just putting words in the other sources' mouths. So of course, just be careful with this. Use the adjectives that are more concrete and more provable, and that's to reduce subjectivity and reduce bias. Okay, let's go back to the PowerPoint. Okay, somehow it got a little bit weird. Always, always. All right, so there we go. I'm just going to present it again. There we go. Okay. So, for example, as we've talked about, instead of saying some students are afraid, we would use the word some students fear. So you can see, like, are afraid is changing that helping verb are and the be verb and the adjective to a verb. And so you can also take this verb adjective form and change it just into a strong verb. Okay, so we're getting rid of this be. So, am, is, are, were, be, being, been. We want to get rid of this and just make it a super, super, super strong verb. And that can be very similar to, the adjective chart we just talked about. Yeah, perfect. Okay. So here's another example. It is the governor who signs or vetoes bills. We just say the governor signs or vetoes bills. Okay. The it is just is so unnecessary here. It's repetitive. We don't need that. We just want to focus on the subject, which is the governor, and we're going to make the verb just super clear. Instead of saying, as classrooms are getting or are becoming more ethnically and culturally diverse, there is a growing need to respect, appreciate, and integrate students' cultures and funds of knowledge in the classroom environment to maximize their learning. So instead of saying, as classrooms are getting more ethnically and culturally diverse, you can say, as ethnic and cultural diversity increases in classrooms, the need to respect da 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 da. So instead of saying there is a growing need to respect, you just say the need to respect. Instead of saying as classrooms are getting you more culturally and ethnically diverse, you'd say as ethnic and cultural diversity increases. Okay, so we're flipping this to reduce this redundant information. So again, you can go through your writing and just do a search find for any of those be verbs and see if there's a more direct way that focuses on the subject and then just a clear verb without the helping verbs. Yeah, and this kind of goes into the same thing. So vague pronouns. Okay, so let's avoid using expletive. I always have such a hard time, even though I've been talking about this for like 3 years. Expletives at the beginning of sentences. Okay, so we're not going to say it is obvious because your professor is going to highlight that and say what's obvious, who said this. So instead, we're going to focus on being super direct, right? So instead of saying it is obvious that, just the same way, we want to get rid of I believe that. So anything that ends with that before you get to your subject needs to get rid of. So instead of saying it is obvious that LGBTQI plus students, staff, and families have the greatest stake in schools creating inclusive climates, you just start with the subject. LGBTQIA plus students, staff, and families. Okay, so you're getting rid of the random it. Okay, so what does this it correlate to? So that's also a very specific way we can move our writing from more of an undergraduate feel to a more graduate feel, getting rid of these vague pronouns that exist just to add words. So again, these teaching strategies, right? This leads, this requires. So these are all ways that we just add words without adding information. So, we instead of saying as a result, all teachers of public education, as a result, public school teachers, okay, we're getting rid of these extra words here, are expected and required are required because expected and required are like the same thing, right? In not exactly the same thing, but if you're going to say required, that means expected. To teach students with all different needs and abilities, to teach students with different needs and abilities, this all should not be there. And so you guys can go through this type, and I'll send you guys the link to this PowerPoint, but you can go through these examples in more detail on your own. But for vague pronouns, this is an easy fix, a super, super easy fix. And it's one of the most common mistakes that we make in our writing, just because this is how we speak. And so oftentimes we translate how we speak into our writing. And so one way to evolve our writing, make it sound more academic, is to focus on consolidating, being concise, and that means getting rid of these vague pronouns. Perfect. Okay, we're at the last one for our writing for clarity. So remember, we're getting rid of the vague pronouns and now we're focusing on more specific words. This goes back to our adjectives, it goes back to our adverbs, it goes back to our verbs. So instead of saying this, the politician talked about several of the merits of after school programs, you can see the politician touted. Now, if vocabulary is not your strong suit, get online, search um, graduate level verbs or graduate level, graduate level verbs is what I would ask you to do. And search that and try to go through your writing and start replacing, because when we say talked about several of the merits of, there's so many things here, there's so many words, and it means the same thing as touted. And so that's also something that you can directly ask a writing coach at the writing center. You can send them your paper and say, one of my concerns is my academic vocabulary, because I have to say, everyone, I would say 99% of graduate students, that is one of their top concerns, is just sounding smart, right? We are all smart, but we need that kind of validation. And if you're not exposed to academic writing, if you're not previously exposed to this in a serious way, then you're going to often feel that your writing is not up to par, quote unquote. So that's something that you can ask the writing coach to specifically help you with. This is also something that will evolve as you read. So the more you read, sorry, let me rephrase. The more academic articles and books that you read, the more academic sounding your writing will become. That's just because of exposure. When you're reading article after article, you're subconsciously going to pick up on how things are phrased, how things are presented, what verbs are used. And so for everybody here that's really worried about word choice and vocabulary, my biggest suggestion is just to continue reading academic articles and books. And your writing will evolve, of course, with hard work from you, but it will also evolve subconsciously. I promise you this. So that's one of my suggestions for you here. But also definitely check out, academic language on Google. Check out the Writing Center coaches as well. So this leads us to our very first example. Remember, I read this before we went through all 8 points. So we have been able to transition this one sentence with 20 words to this second sentence with 12, because we were able to check out and evolve our passive voice, our helping verbs, our prepositions, and word choice. So we were able to go through this one sentence and do edits on 4 out of the 8 suggestions. And from that, we were able to evolve our writing to a more concise and academically sound sentence. I know this seems like a lot of work, but this is where your writing might be, this first sentence, and this is where your writing can be, which is your second sentence. And it takes time and it takes patience. And you're not going to, wake up tomorrow and everything be perfect, because I don't believe that anybody's writing is perfect ever. It's just, we're all continuously evolving. So let me check the time. So perfect. So what I would like everybody to do, I'm assuming that we all have a paper or something pulled up next to us on our computer, or, maybe you print your papers and it's next to you on your desk. But what I would like before we move into our second part is for you to take about 10 minutes now and go through one of your documents, looking for these eight parts that we just went over. I will leave the chat open during this, and then I will also obviously be here. So this is also a time for questions, and then we'll get started on our second part of the workshop here in about 10 minutes. So this is a perfect time for you to review your document, ask me questions in the chat or verbally, or if you want to go get some water or something, you can go ahead and do that too. All right, you guys. So we were working on that for about 10 minutes. I hope that you were able to go through your document and check out at least some of the 8 suggestions I went over today. And so, of course, this takes a lot of time. And so you got started today, and you can to continue that, throughout the rest of the semester. I want to thank everybody who messaged me privately and also in the group for your really great questions. I think that and Courtney, thank you for so much for sharing your worry about or your feedback that you've received about pronouns. This is such a common thing. I know that all of us we write so much and we want to center ourselves so much in our writing. And so there's a variety of different ways we can do this, but my biggest suggestion is always to center the content or the topic that you're writing about instead of centering ourselves. As I said, we speak like this. When we say, "I was thinking," or "Oh, I was questioning this," like we want to take that and move that away, unless your professor was specifically asking you to reflect on the process that you were going through. So as you all probably know, USD loves, especially Souls, loves, loves, loves for their students to reflect. And so sometimes using I is completely appropriate. But some of those more, the bigger projects or the bigger papers that you have in your classes, most, as is across school, yeah. Um, a lot of these like more major projects, there might be a section where you're talking about like your positionality and you're talking about yourself. But for the most part, instead of using I, we want to focus on the topic that we're discussing and making that, the winner. So, remove it. Just I always think about it myself because I used to have a big problem with this too, is I want to decenter myself in my writing and I want to center the topic that I'm focusing on because everybody is writing about such powerful topics and we want that to be the emphasis instead of ourselves and instead of what we think about it. And that's hard and that takes practice. But you can get there. So I always say get rid of that I phrase and then incorporate the topic first. Yeah, so Rosa, this is a great question. So these are called contractions, and we do not want to use contractions in our academic writing. This means we use, instead of saying don't, we want to use do not. Okay, so this is what a contraction is. It's just one of those small things in our writing that make it that really separate it from, as we said, this undergrad feel, this kind of high school feel to our graduate feel. And that's just because we don't need to shorten words in our writing here because that kind of falls under almost slang. So instead of saying don't, that stands for do not. So we want to say exactly what we mean. Great question. Yeah, so Omar, you're right. But when we're talking about being concise, we're not trying to shorten the words themselves. Yeah, but I totally understand where you're coming from. I think that if we wanted to be super duper concise, we would use contractions. But since contractions kind of falls under the like slang terminology, it just doesn't read academic. But totally feel you. Definitely. So we're moving into the second part of our workshop, which is organization. And so this part, we're going to go through thesis statements, topic sentences, transition words, and then order of importance. I know a lot of you mentioned in our chat in the beginning of our workshop that these are pretty important things for you to focus on. Oops, sorry. So for this like mini part of this presentation, I'm going to use one of my students' essays as an example. So, but also I really recommend you still having a document pulled up so that way you can go through this as we are working. Remember, we're workshopping as we're going through. So we're going to start with a thesis statement. So every paper should have a thesis statement, okay? No matter what you're writing about, you should have a clear idea. So a thesis statement is your main point. It's your main idea. It's your central message. It's the back. I always tell my students in college, It's the backbone of your paper. So if you don't have a backbone, what's going to happen to your body? It's going to be completely fall apart. It's going to be wobbly. If you just removed your entire backbone, you wouldn't have any sort of structure. Okay. So instead of our essay kind of, or our paper just kind of being all over the place, we need a central point that everything else is working from. Okay. So these thesis statements are very, 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 very important. One of the first things I do when I look at my students' papers is try to find the thesis statement. And if I don't, I'm going to sit there and go, okay, I'm not really sure how everything else is connected to each other. Your title is not your thesis statement. A lot of my students have been like, oh, but you saw the topic from the title. And I'm like, that's just the topic. So tell us what your thesis statement is all about. Tell us what the main point of this piece of writing is about. Your thesis statement is about 1 to 2 sentences long. It's not a full paragraph. And it helps you guide your writing and keep it focused. And it appears at the beginning of your paper. It is in your introduction paragraph. Okay. So your thesis statement lives in your introduction. It is 1 to 2 sentences long, and it is what helps guide you. So I know that a few of you mentioned writer's block, or, you know, not being centered or not being focused. And so if you have a thesis statement, you can get to the end of one of your body paragraphs and be like, okay, does this connect back to my thesis? Yes, it does. Okay, I feel good about this. But if you don't have a thesis statement, then you have nothing to double check yourself. So again, if you're thinking about your thesis statement as this main topic and your sub ideas coming out of it, it wants to be directly related. Something I tell my students in my college classes as well is, if you think about your hand, and if you think about like your thesis statement is your palm, right? Then your body paragraphs, the paragraphs that come after your introduction, need to be directly connected to it. Okay. If they're not directly connected, then you need to make your connection more explicit. Otherwise, there's going to be a little bit of an issue with organization and structure. So this is a very important part of your writing. Just to be clear, your thesis statement can change as your writing continues. So you might have your thesis statement at the beginning of your essay or the beginning of your paper, and as you're researching, you might see that your writing is kind of going in a different direction. And that's fine. You don't need to be married to your thesis statement. As you're going into a different direction, you can go back to your thesis statement and make some adjustments. And that's okay, because the more we learn, the more we research, and the more developed our writing becomes, our original ideas might need to be tweaked a little bit. And so that's really important. So give yourself some grace here. Excuse me. A well-developed thesis statement probably uses some conjunctions. And so if you don't know what conjunctions are, there are two different kinds of conjunctions. There's coordinating and there's what's called subordinating. So for coordinating conjunctions, that's for my English learners and my English teachers, these are fanboys: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. For my subordinating conjunctions, they're a little bit more complex. So we use although, we use since, we use because. So and I'm going to give you examples of what they can look like. What we want to avoid in our thesis statements is we don't want to include technical language that the reader won't understand. Okay. Unless you're writing a technical paper that's for a very specific audience. You also don't want to use jargon, and jargon is kind of just like slang or, language that we would use in speaking that's not academic. We've talked about this before. We don't want to use vague or subjective words like interesting or exciting. And you want to avoid using abstract words unless, and there's a star here because I'm going to show you this, unless you're ready to define it. So the example here is society, values, and culture. So the reason I use this is because so many of my grad students write about culture, okay? Because Masters in TESOL program really emphasizes culture. And so we don't really want to use the word culture in our thesis statement unless we've already explained it. Now, this is what we call operationalizing our constructs. Um, for my students who are not SOL students, I think that your professors might call this a little bit different, defining the abstracts or something like that. I was doing my a workshop, and one of your professors came and told me that they use a different word. But basically, like the key terms in your research question or in your document basically needs to be defined. Okay, that's what we mean by operationalizing the construct. Because when I say culture, we all might have like a vague understanding of what that means, but what I mean for it specific to my paper needs to be explained. It needs to be defined. Okay. Okay, so here's some examples of like defining the constructs or narrowing down the constructs. So instead of saying society, you could be more specific, like men and women, writers, American educators, taxpayers, television addicts, okay? Or like instead of the media, advertisers, sitcoms, instead of our boring be verbs that we've already talked about how we want to evolve, we want to make sure that our verbs are great action verbs, generate, flip, signify, endure, discover. So we want to keep on working on those verbs. So here's an example of two thesis statements from my students. An analysis of the college admission process reveals one challenge facing counselors: accepting students with high test scores or students with strong extracurricular backgrounds. So you know that this paper is going to be about the acceptance of students, and it's going to be discussing two of these categories: high test scores or extracurricular. The second one is high school graduates should be required to take a year off to pursue community service projects before entering college in order to increase their maturity and global awareness. So in these two thesis statements, because this is from a specific type of paper, they have two ideas in both of these, but oftentimes you might just have one. So here's another thesis statement. After analysis of the contributing factors of homelessness, it has become evident that tackling this national issue starts in local communities. So this is an example of a thesis statement with one point, right? Tackling starts in local communities. These ones we're talking, they do have one point, like the college admission process. They have one and then two coming out, and then taking a year off and then two coming out, right? And that's fine too. It just depends on what type of paper you're writing. So you can ask your professor, like, how complex should this thesis statement be? What should I include in it? So excuse me. So I know that everybody has their documents pulled up. So why don't you just go ahead, if you have not done so already, is identify your thesis statement. And what I mean by that is just, highlight it, highlight it in yellow. We're going to do this again at the end, but just make sure that you can find it. If you can't find it, or if you're having trouble finding it, go to your introduction paragraph and see if there's a place where you have stated the overall idea. Okay. So what is this paper talking about? Okay. What is this? What are you focusing on here? So windy where I am right now. Don't know if you guys can hear that. Patrick, that's a really great question. So it would be in your abstract, and it would also be in your introduction. Yes, no problem. Okay, so I am going to move on, but we will have time to search for your thesis statements too. Okay, in a second. So once we have our thesis statement, what we want to focus on is our topic sentences. Our topic sentences is something that oftentimes students forget. Okay, so if you think about your paper, you have your cover page, you have your abstract possibly, and then you have your first page. So your first page includes, your title, your introduction, and your introduction has your thesis statement in it. And then you start getting into your body paragraphs. Although some of you may be including headers for your body paragraphs, which you really should, you still want to state a thesis statement. Okay. So your header is not your thesis statement. Your header is kind of like your thesis statement because it mentions the overarching idea of your paragraph, but it's not your full thesis statement. Okay. So your body paragraphs will be composed of many sentences, obviously. The first sentence, which includes a singular idea, in the paragraph is called a topic sentence. Okay, so it's your first sentence in your body paragraphs. Again, your essay or paper is structured with an introduction, then it's structured with body paragraphs, and then it's structured with a conclusion. So your first sentence of each body paragraph is your topic sentence. Sometimes it depends on the it depends on your writing experience. It also depends on your professor, but sometimes students will choose to write a statement that connects the previous paragraph to the next. And so you might be working on transitioning from paragraph to paragraph. And so that's fine. But in your body paragraphs, you want to have that very clear thesis statement first. Then you write a paragraph. And then remember, within your body paragraphs, oftentimes you have little sub paragraphs. And so that's when you can more like work on the cohesiveness of it and try to connect each of like your sub paragraphs. But that first sentence of each body paragraph needs to be your topic sentence. To be very clear, your topic sentence does not usually have a citation, so a parenthetical one, and it should never be a direct quote. Okay, I'll say that one more time. The first sentence of your body paragraphs should never be a direct quote. That's because the first sentence, your topic sentence of your body paragraphs, needs to be written by you. And either, you can just like write a sentence yourself, basically explain what you're going to write about, or you can make a statement and support it with outside sources. Is this the same for writing a business proposal? Courtney, I'm not 100%, but I would guess that yes, it is the same. Yes, but that might be a question for your professor. But in general, when we're writing something, we organize our writing based on paragraphs. And then each paragraph has its own organizational structure. And so our first sentence of any paragraph we write kind of just states what we're going to talk about, right? And so we're not jumping into examples quite yet. So I think like any statistics or anything like that would definitely be more in like the example part of your body paragraph. It wouldn't be that topic sentence. So I would say this is the same for business proposals. However, I would double check that with your professor. Okay. So your topic sentence supports your thesis statement. It has to be directly related to it. And the purpose is to unify the content of your paragraph under one controlling idea. You're telling the reader of the subject that's going to be discussed. Okay. So think about your topic sentences are like mini thesis statements. Your thesis statements in your introduction, it is the overarching idea of your entire essay. And then in each body paragraph, you have a topic sentence, which is related to the thesis and tells the reader what's the overarching idea for that paragraph. So they are kind of like mini thesis statements. So let's look at these examples because they should have controlling ideas. So this first topic sentence, crime in poverty-stricken areas occurs as a result of systemic discrimination. So the topic is crime and the controlling idea is systemic discrimination. So you wouldn't just say crime exists in poverty-stricken areas because that's pretty broad. So that might be like the topic of your paper, but for your body paragraphs, we're getting a little bit more specific, and that's what we call controlling ideas. Teen pregnancy may be prevented by improved education. The topic is teen pregnancy. A controlling idea is improved education. And finally, having a first child is difficult because of significant adjustments. Topic is having a first child. Controlling idea is significant adjustments. So what you can do, and what I usually do, is go through your document and highlight the first sentence of each body paragraph. And then I would go ahead and double check that it's not a quote and that each of these sentences can be directly tied to your thesis, and that they state the supporting topic, which is the main point of your paragraph. Yes, so you just need to frame. The idea here is to frame the examples you're going to provide. So you're telling the reader, like, hey, I'm about to talk to you about crime and how it's related to systemic discrimination. So the reader's like, okay, I got this. So now these examples you use are all related to systemic discrimination. Okay. So please do not even try to read this. The only reason I put this up here is so that you can see the framing of the paragraph, okay? So you can see that I have my topic, or yeah, the topic sentence and the concluding sentence in yellow. And if colors is difficult for you, they're the only ones that are in all caps. And so you can see that the first one, the topic sentence and concluding sentence frame the body of your paragraph. Okay. So you need to, scientists have learned to supplement the sense of sight with numerous ways with electromagnetic radiation. Okay. Perfect. So I know that my topic is sense of sight and my controlling idea is electromagnetic radiation. So then at the bottom, we're also going to talk about, at the concluding sentence, we're going to restate our supporting point, which is electromagnetic radiation and sense of sight. So how this works is it just needs to be framed. So that way it's organized properly. So that way the reader can see what you're going to write about. You give the reader tons of great, examples, and then you sum up your paragraph with the concluding sentence that restates the topic sentence. Okay, and this is another example of a topic sentence. Identifying the contributing causes of homelessness at a local level can help community leaders find more effective solutions. Okay, perfect. So our topic is homelessness, and our contributing idea is local level. Yeah, so that's what our topic sentence is. So you can go ahead and just, as I said, review some of your topic sentences. We are going to have time to do this in a quick second. But as I'm talking through this, I hope you guys have been checking out your topic sentences. And then if you find that you don't have one, like for example, you just jump into it, a statistic or a quote or information like that, then just put an asterisk for yourself and say add topic sentence and highlight that. So you know you can come back and add it. That's what I do in my writing all the time, because it's very rare that you just write your paper and all the components are perfectly there. So just go back and check it out and make sure it's there. So I hope that everybody at least got to see if there's like one topic sentence that you have, and you know what you need to do to go ahead and identify those. I had a few students comment in the beginning of this that they wanted to go over transition words, and that is very, very great. I'm glad that we are interested in this. Transition words are very important, and it's one of the main parts of writing that actually students leave out. And so I know that this may seem counterintuitive to making your writing concise, because transition words and phrases are adding to your writing. But if you do them if you add these in a proper way, then it's instead of making it, super superfluous, you're going to make it more directive, which means that your reader can understand how everything is connected better. So transitional words and phrases creates powerful links between the ideas within your paper. Excuse me. It helps the reader understands your logic. So you're connecting your main ideas together, your supporting points together, but you're also connecting your examples together. But it's hard because transitional words and phrases have very different nuances and connotations, and there are different categories. So what I always, while I'm writing, is I, again, go to Google Image and I type in English transition words. And there are tons that pop up, like tons of categories, tons of really nice lists. And so you can go ahead and do that as you're writing. And you have to think about, why am I adding a transition word? Because we don't just want to add in addition 60 times in our paper, okay? We want it to be more nuanced, and we want it to flow better than that. And so there's so many different categories of transition words, addition, illustration, conclusion, qualification, tons and tons and tons. So it's important to know that there's transitions all throughout our paper, between sections, between paragraphs, within paragraphs. So it's not like they only belong in a specific place. We do want to avoid putting transitions kind of like at the beginnings of paragraphs. And I mean like sequential transitions. So one way of evolving your writing from kind of that undergrad writing is, instead of saying like to start da 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 at the beginning of our paragraph, instead we just want to remember, we want to state our topic sentence. And so we just want to be very clear about the main idea. So, in these topic sentences, none of them said to start or secondly or finally. We just stated the topic, and we stated the controlling idea. So one way to kind of evolve your writing is to look at the beginnings of your paragraphs and make sure that they don't start with a sequential transition. You can transition in different ways, but we don't want to say to begin, secondly, and all of that. Okay, so this slide kind of is confusing. But if we think about the transitions on the left-hand side, and we look at the category on the right-hand side, we can see that there's lots of different reasons why we use transitions. Do we use it to show a cause? Is it to show addition, which is different, right? Is it intensification? Is it contrast? Is it comparison? And so you can see that all of these words have different reasons. So as you're going through, some of the most common transitions are used for addition and also for clarification. And so clarification is used often when you're defining constructs, when you're adding to information to be a little bit more specific. And so we want to use these words. Transition words are super important, and they show the reader the flow of information from your perspective. So, a few of you have asked about not using pronouns and not using, not trying to be like super emotional in our own writing. And a way to do that is to, instead of saying like, I believe this, is to show the connections between your ideas through transition words. And so you're writing a story, basically. You're telling a story of what you think, but instead of saying, I think, I believe, blah, 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 you're putting together information in a way that's going into depth about a topic that you're writing about. And so that's what we mean by, you're presenting something from your point of view without saying like, I believe and I think. So here's an example of one of my students, and you can see that this student did not cite any information, but we're not going to worry about that right now because we're just focusing on transitions. But you can see that the student used a ton of transitions. So identifying the contributing causes of homelessness at a local level can help community leaders find more effective solutions. That's our topic sentence. In fact, it is not enough to assume the causes behind homelessness. Instead, the homeless individuals must be sought after and interviewed to get a correct understanding of the reasons why they're living this lifestyle. So we say, in fact, and you can use that, or if that's too superfluous for you in your writing, you don't need to. You could also just start with, it is not enough. Instead is showing contrast, okay? It's not enough to do this. Instead, we should do this. Furthermore, right, we're adding information. Indeed shows your support of this. So furthermore, it is up to the leaders of our community to organize such canvassing efforts and train volunteers in effective interview techniques. Indeed, these efforts may take time. So instead of saying, I believe these efforts may take time, you could say, indeed, and that shows your agreement with this. However, the results will hopefully provide However, again, is showing contrast. Because of the necessity of this information, da 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 da. So this means that we're adding onto it, cause and effect. So some of you might say, hey, why are we starting a sentence with because? But you can start a sentence with because if it is a complex or a compound complex sentence. And that means if it is longer than just a dependent clause. Because of the necessity of this information is a dependent clause. But we can add, it is vital that this begins immediately for the purpose of bettering our community and the country in general. And so this changes this into a complex sentence, and that's okay. Yeah, so that's a good question, Omar. So basically, there's not a magic number of transitions to use. It's just about, and this really comes to your style of writing. You need to use everybody needs to use some transitions, okay? Because you're showing the relationship between your ideas. How many transitions you use really depends on your style, but also what you're talking about. So this student used a bunch of transitions, and that's okay. I would probably delete to sum up. To sum up is kind of a more undergrad transition, but the rest of them I would leave in. You could delete in fact as well to make it a little bit more concise. But my recommendation for you all is, especially within body paragraphs, is to make sure you are clearly showing the relationship between your ideas. And that might be with contrasting, like however, it might be additional, furthermore. So I would definitely make sure you're using some transitions. Whether or not it's many is just up to really your own style and what you're talking about. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and identify your transition words here in just a second. Yeah, no problem. So instead of doing that now, we're going to do that later. So we're just going to jump into our last part of our organization. And this is the importance of order in our writing. Now, I used to do a lot of workshopping for the graduate students in SOLs. And their number one question was, I have all of these ideas, but what order do I put them in? And I don't know if any of you have come up with the same issue of like you've researched, you've thought about all of this, and you have all of these great ideas, but you're just like, I don't know how to structure this. Why would I put this one above this one? So there's a lot of different ways we can order our writing. Very oftentimes, students put the strongest points first. And what the strongest points mean is that they are the most directly related to your thesis. So another way that people order, let me just jump ahead. Okay, so we're going to get to this in a second. So the order of importance is most important in argumentative or persuasive papers. And so the title of argumentative persuasive can go different ways. Like, I don't know if like a business proposal might fall under this if you're trying to convince somebody to do something or to believe something or to, donate money to something. But it's very often that people use the strongest points first in their writing. So we look at our thesis statement, we look at our ideas, and we say, okay, which of these ideas are the most directly related to our thesis statement? And we put them in that kind of order. In relation to order of importance, we need to keep strength and purpose of our connections in our head. Okay, so we want to know everything should be nuanced and ordered in a specific way. So strength here means the connection can be clearly seen or understood, while the purpose means that the reasoning can also be clearly understood. So connection and reasoning. These are two important words. We're going to want to write an outline, and then we're going to look at the connections and the reasoning behind the order. And that way we can move things around and switch them and change them. I do want to say that oftentimes for students' research, they write their introduction paragraph, and then if they have any sort of like historical information that they want to include before the readers start reading about the specific themes that they found in the research, Oftentimes that first body paragraph is kind of more of like a historical background paragraph. And I talk about that in my literature review workshop too. So, for example, one of my students wrote about the education system in Saudi Arabia. And so she knew that her audience would mostly not be made up of Saudi Arabians. So, what she did is she wrote her intro, and then her first body paragraph was a brief overview of the history of education in Saudi Arabia. And then she got into the themes that she found from the literature. And so that is very common to do. And it doesn't necessarily need to be like historical background, but should be some sort of background to provide the readers with like a context. And so that oftentimes can be done in our intro, but it also can be done in our first body paragraph. What I want you all to think about is the word inform. Okay. So this word inform, and what that means is, how is each thing connected? What do I, the reader, need to know before I read the next part? So imagine, it's like a book. In the beginning of a book, all the characters are introduced, the setting is introduced, the main ideas are introduced. And then as you're reading the book, more details come up and all that kind of stuff. But in the beginning of the book, the author provides you with enough information for you to understand what comes next. And so the same thing goes with your writing. So in terms of informing, you want to make sure that what comes first informs what comes second. So my knowledge from body paragraph 1 will help me understand body paragraph 2. And then my knowledge from body paragraph 1 and 2 will help me understand body paragraph 3. So you want to be thinking of your audience here. That's one of my biggest pieces of a suggestion, is thinking about the audience. Yeah. So Helen asked about the order of importance in organization and reflective essay. Great. So all of this still stands for a reflective essay, Helen. So what I would do is, you would write your introduction, and for you, possibly your thesis statement might have a bunch of ideas that you're reflecting on. So like, for example, like, what did you learn? And so maybe you learned A, B, C, and D. And then in body paragraph 1, you would talk about A, body paragraph 2, B, and so on and so forth. So for you, you might want to order it as in like biggest aha moments, or the most important thing that you learned. You might want to order that from like most important to least important. Or if what you're talking about is kind of complex and the reader needs to understand a certain subject first before you get into the second one, then you would still order it like I was talking about. But reflective essays tend to just be more stream of consciousness, a little bit more just, what did you learn throughout the semester, and how did you learn it? Yeah, no problem. So my grad students, for their reflective essays, they usually talk about, they usually order it in terms of order of importance to them. So the first body paragraph would be what they learned that was the most important to them, and so on and so forth. Okay. So in lengthy papers, you should have headers and subheaders. Okay. That's point blank. That's what you need. And so what you in something like, a reflection paper or something like that, I don't know if you need that. But in more like lengthy papers where your body paragraphs should actually be divided into sub paragraphs, you need headers and subheaders. And you can organize this in a variety of ways: chronologically, thematically, methodologically, but usually they're organized thematically. And so what that means is that once you've reviewed your literature, you've found different themes, you're able to put them in body paragraphs, and you order them as what informs the next step, as we've been talking about. But you use headers and subheaders for that organization. That's something that the Writing Center can definitely help you all with. That's something that we tell most students with their final papers is, hey, you have to go back. You need to put headers and subheaders in this, because otherwise the organization is kind of hard to understand. So APA 7 has changed the headers and subheaders. And so make sure that you're using the up-to-date version. Yes, and we can talk about that. So what I always suggest for everybody is to create an essay outline for themselves, no matter what kind of writing they're doing. If it's a paper, if it's an outline, if it's a proposal, just make sure that you create an outline for yourself. And so this is just an example of a research paper that one of my students did. And so this is kind of what we're looking at. So we want to say, like, why did the topic of body paragraph 1 come first? Okay, we want to reflect on that. And what is the connection between body paragraph 1 and body paragraph 2? So you want to think about this, right? So be purposeful in your ordering. Ask yourself these questions. So if you have your essay put together, write out an outline on the side and start asking and reflecting on this. Oh, does it actually make sense for body paragraph 1 to come first? Or, I do define a lot of very important things in body paragraph 2, so maybe I should switch them. So start asking yourself these questions. Here's another example. Here's a more specific. So this is a general outline, and then this is my student's outline. So, excuse me. So for my student, they talked about identifying the contributing causes equals community leaders equals effective solutions. So after the effective solutions have been created, implementation needs help from local organizations. So this person wrote about effective solutions first, and then they talked about implementation second, because in order to understand the implementation section, we needed to understand the effective solution section. So for us, as readers, we would not have understood the implementation section as deeply if it had been body paragraph 1 instead of body paragraph 2. Here's a more specific outline that we can look at. We asked ourselves, why did body paragraph 1 come first? And what's the connection between body paragraph 1 and body paragraph 2? Now we want to start thinking within our body paragraphs. So what is the connection between evidence 1 and evidence 2? And why did evidence 1 come first? What is the relationship between these two pieces of evidence that we put? Why did we order them the way we ordered them? Did we just put them in the order that we found them? Because if that's the case, we want to go back and just double check that they make sense. The flow of the essay makes sense. Because even though we might have found evidence 1 first, it might not be the most appropriate to put it first. So we want to start thinking about these examples, thinking about the order that we've put things in. And this is a very, very simplistic essay, my friends. So you might be looking at this and being like, wow, my paper is not structured like this. It has subparagraphs and da-da-da. And that might totally be the case. I'm just using a very, very simple essay outline for this example. But the same thing goes for your essay outlines that you create for yourself. Be very reflective about why. Why did I put this information here? Is this the best place for it? Does it serve a purpose? And so everything should be purposeful. Okay. So you can see that we have our more specific outline here. So, we're thinking about the connection between evidence 1 and evidence 2. Why did we put training community members to interview first before canvassing local interview areas for interviewees? It's because we needed to make sure that people were trained before they go out and conduct interviews. So training comes before the interview process. For body paragraph 2, identify local organizations comes before include incentives. So we need to identify who we're going to try to incentivize. So we need to figure out the organizations before we include the incentives. So this is very purposeful. We see an order here. Okay. Okay. So we're all set with our organization part. So why don't we just take about 5 minutes to go through, make sure that we can highlight our thesis statement in yellow, go ahead and underline our topic sentences. You don't need to put a star if you don't need to, but if you want to be more specific about your topic sentences, put a star next to the topic and 2 stars next to the controlling idea. Highlight your transition words in green. And then number 4 will have to be on your own time, but make an outline of your paper. Okay, Omar, I see your question. So headers and subheaders come with pretty lengthy papers. And so you wouldn't put headers or subheaders in your abstract, you wouldn't put it in your intro, you wouldn't put it in your conclusion. You would put headers and subheaders um, throughout your body paragraphs. So it depends on, I guess it just depends on how long your technical paper is and then how many points that you are making within your body paragraphs. Like if your body paragraphs are pretty complex and you have multiple points, you probably would put subheaders underneath them. Um, and that could be a question for your professor is like, hey, I've learned about subheaders and or I went to the writing clinic, they talked about headers and subheaders. Should I be utilizing this? Um, I'm not exactly, I'm not 1,000% about technical paper. How long is your paper? 7 pages? Okay. How many body paragraphs do you have? Do you know yet? Okay. Yeah, so I would just see because if you're I'm guessing that your 7 pages does not include your cover page, it does not include your abstract, it does not include your references. So if it's just 7 pages, you might use some subheaders or at least headers. So I would just go ahead and email your professor and be like, hey, is this a requirement? Because they would know what they would be able to explain their expectations um, for you. Yeah, so it's not usually word count wise as much as it is page wise. Yeah, so you can look at a paper with subheaders and headers on Purdue OWL. They have lots of great examples. Or I could also quickly give you an example of what some of my papers look like. So, for example, a paper that I'm working on right now is currently about 18 pages. And so you definitely include headers and subheaders there. Um, and this goes back to your professor expectations. So all the professors I had in SOLS through my master's program and within my PhD program expect headers and subheaders. However, I have done some work with students outside of SOLS and they've said their professors don't expect it. So I would just double check with your professor. Do they expect this? But my rule of thumb is that if your body paragraphs are longer than just one paragraph, you should definitely like if you're writing a body paragraph and it is a page long, you need to cut that up, right? You need to reorganize it. So I would look at your body paragraphs and say like how long are they? Are they a page with only one paragraph? Okay, we need to start reorganizing this a little bit, and that would include subheaders. So that's one way to look at that for sure. But if you're talking about like a reflection paper that's 4 paragraphs, like
No.
or 4 pages, you probably don't need that. But if it's an act, like if it's a more technical, as Omar said, or academic like research paper, you would use those.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, sure, no worries, no worries. And this actually can move us like straight into our APA style that we're going to spend only a few minutes on because I'm not here to go through all of APA with you all. I just want to give you some really great resources. APA is going to be like one of the number one things the writing coaches work with you for because APA style is so technical. So let's just go through some general information. Okay, so first of all, I want to share this with everybody before I forget. Whoop. And if for some reason, excuse me, you lose access to this PowerPoint, you can just email the Writing Center and they will email you a copy of it. Or you can email me. Okay, so what I have set for APA is you can see that these 3 are yellow and that's because they are hyperlinks. So if we click into them, the first one is APA style changes. So these are major changes between APA 6 and APA 7. So this is just, for me, this is just kind of dense, but it's broken down into categories like citations and references, avoiding bias. So this is really, really a great resource if you know APA style a little bit, you know. So if you don't know APA style at all, what I would do first is I would go to the Purdue OWL PowerPoint. So where I went was this third yellow section, which is called APA PowerPoint. And I went here and it brought me to this website. So here you can see it says APA PowerPoint slide presentation. I click into the PowerPoint slide presentation itself. You'll download it and it will open for you. This is a really great resource, and I've used this a lot myself. And the reason why is because it goes through a lot of different information. Like, we talk about style, in-text citations, and references. So it's not just citations, it's how to write as well. And so, yeah, we want to, so we want to include first person instead of third person. You know, it has little tips like this: active voice rather than passive voice, which we talked about today. The language, you know, talks about quantitative articles, qualitative articles, talks about a lit review. So if you're doing more specific work, it has a little bit of information on that. You know, if it's not any of these things, go to your instructor. And it has basics, you know. And then it talks about what it should include. Like, you should have a title page, an abstract, a main body, and your references. And then it talks about like what your title page should look like. So there's been some pretty significant changes from APA 6 to APA 7, which completely threw me as I was doing my writing for my the PhD work this semester. But it can give you like what it should look like. This is a student paper, which does include a running head, but then, you know, a professional paper will. This is kind of confusing because, you know, so for me, I was like, okay, well, my papers are student papers. I'm writing for my PhD program. But my professors were like, no, 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 no. You're pretending like you're writing for, you know, publication. So you have to include, it has to be positioned like a professional paper. So that's an example of like definitely double checking your professor expectations. Yeah. So it goes through all of this stuff. So you can go through this on your own time. Yes. Yes. So you should use your San Diego email to get access to this. Yeah. Thanks, Omar. Good. So you guys can go through this on your own, which is good. And then the last part here. So style changes, and then this is just overall changes. Excuse me. So you can go through and you can see that, you know, paper formatting, heading levels, like I talked about, with headers and subheaders and what they should be looking like, you know, how they're indented, are going to be pretty different from APA 6. And then I think that, let's see. Yeah, so Danny, let me just pull up one of my papers that I'm working on and I can give you guys an idea of what headers and subheaders look like. Okay. Not to say that my paper is perfect, but I have been toying around with headers and subheaders. So no, that's not what okay. So like, for example, this was my intro, super short. I've done a lot of revisions since then, but let's just look at the headers and subheaders. Okay. So I have my title, and then my subheader number 1 is this one. So it's flush left, it's bold. It just looks like my title just to the left. And then my subheader 3 is this one. So you can see with it being italicized that these belong underneath this one. And so this one is my first body paragraph, and then it is broken down into social context and institutional context. And then institutional context is broken down even more specifically into explicit statements and actionable support. and then it goes back to organizational context, and then it goes back to my second body paragraph.
Okay. All right. That helps. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah. But my professor told me that my professor was like, hey, this is way too much. So we need to work on just expanding it a little bit, since it just seems like boom, boom, boom. But I mean, this is how this paper is structured. But as I said, this is a 9-page paper at the moment, but then it evolved. I think right now my paper is, let's go back in. Okay, well, it's taking some time, but you guys can see that that's kind of an example of what it can look like. But definitely check with your professors, because I don't want to tell you that you have to do something when your professors are not expecting that. So, I know that a few of you have asked about like business proposals. And so with that, I don't know the exact rule for headers and subheaders. I'm really talking more about like research papers. And so go ahead and just double check with your professors about that. Yeah. So my last thing that I have before any questions you guys might have is just, use the Souls Graduate Writing Center. If you are a member of Souls, if you're not, just like double check with them that you can't use it, because I'm pretty sure that everybody can. But participating school programs, there we go. So we have all the programs. So if you guys are in one of these, I know that you've said a few of you, I think, are in nursing and business and all that kind of good stuff. So if you're in one of these programs, you can definitely utilize this. Obviously, you are all here today, and it's a Souls Writing Clinic. So go ahead and send your papers. You can go down to services offered. And so it goes into exactly like what we provide for you. So writing workshops, you're here, and then writing coaching. So if you go to the online writing coaching process, it gives you specifics of how exactly this works. So you would send a paper in, the coach would review it from 1 to 2 hours, and then they would review it with you for about 50 minutes one-on-one. So they'll go through all of the revisions they have made, all of the suggestions, all the questions with you afterwards. So they could spend up to almost 3 hours with your document at one time, which is super cool. Excuse me. And so definitely appointments are week by week, first come, first serve. So just go ahead, and when you're ready, fill out the submission form and send it on over to them. What's very helpful is if you can send any sort of directions from your professor to them, so that they can see what your professors have asked. Okay, Rosa. So that's that. Yeah. Oh, sorry. So if you have any issues with the Writing Center, so the only people that should be reviewing are the writing coaches that we have. So the Souls Writing Center is a bit different than the USD Writing Center, like the overarching Writing Center. So let me go here. So like our coaches are listed here. So what I would just double check and make sure, and if you get paired with somebody who is who you find is not as helpful as you would hope they can be, you can always send the Writing Center back an email, get in contact. Like the Dr. Herrera runs this, and this is specifically for graduate students. So we definitely want our graduate students getting the support that they need at this level. So again, our writing coaches are listed on our website. And if you feel like you're getting somebody who is at a different level of writing than you can definitely ask the Writing Center again and just be like, hey, just to clarify, what tab are you in Souls? So I just, it's just, if you just Google like the Souls Graduate Writing Center, you can go, I don't know the exact, so it's just the Writing Center. Current students, I think, and then Writing Center. And so you can just Google too. Like if I go to Google and just type in Writing Center USD, it'll pop right up. So it'll be this first one, and you can see it goes san diego.edu, Souls Current, and then Writing Center. And you shouldn't be given somebody who's you shouldn't be given an undergrad tutor unless they've unless for some reason they've proved to the writing center that their writing is at the same level. So for sure, if you feel like you're having issues with that, first of all, make sure that you're at the Souls Writing Center and not the USD Writing Center, because the USD Writing Center is the general one. This one is specific for graduate students. Okay, you guys. Well, we're almost out of time. If you have any other questions, please, pop them in the chat. I've given you guys the link to the PowerPoint. I've given you my email address. So you can always shoot me on over questions if you have any. However, if you would like your work reviewed, you just go ahead and send that to the Writing Center and they'll pair you up with a coach. But any other questions you have, oh, thanks, Danny. Any questions you have, just stick them in the chat and I can stick around for a few more minutes. Otherwise, just, pat yourselves on the back, give yourselves a huge thank you for showing up today. You could have been watching TV, you could have done a ton of things. So, give yourself a pat on the back because you deserve it. No problem. Thank you guys. Oh, thank you. Thank you. You guys are making my day. I appreciate you all. Thank you. Oh, hey, Caroline. Yeah, so the recorded yes, sorry, I should have I should have said that. So if you go down to the Writing Center page, it has writing workshop videos. So you can click into this and they have 9 different writing workshop videos here, and you can go check out any of them at any time. Thank you. You too. No problem. And I can just go ahead and thank you. I'll just go ahead and put this link in here too for everybody. But I know that you can find it as well. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. If anyone has any other specific questions that they want to ask me, I'm happy to answer them. Anything I can help you with, Omar, Victoria, or Carrie?
No, thank you. It was very helpful.
Good. I'm so glad. I wish you the best of luck as we start the end of our semester.
Thanks. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend. Bye.
Thank you. That's great feedback, Omar. So if you want to go ahead, if you have any time and want to request that, send the Writing Center an email and say that it would be really useful in the beginning of the semester too. And, they'll take student recommendations seriously. So go ahead and send them an email if you'd like. And I can also pass on that information as well. Okay, great job. Good luck in the rest of your semester and thank you for your great questions. Thank you.